Okay, where do we start? What John's got to say is fantastic. What the other speakers have said so far today is also fantastic, because we're getting the real information out. And we've lived in John's boxes for a very long time. I still live in one from time to time because I've had to put my tie on because I was a naval officer, and therefore people expect to see me dressed properly. But when I mix with John, I'm not always in a shirt and tie. So it is breaking out of your comfort zone, and I'm very glad he called me. Now I'm going to stick on the subject I always talk about, which is subversion. If you want to beat these people, you need to understand how they're doing the things to you. And I already know by a couple of guys playing guitars and taking the mickey out of Common Purpose that the message is spreading as to how things are being done. But there's still some more bits of the jigsaw, and I want to show you what we are learning about the people that we have allowed to rule us. And it's horrible to see, and we need to do something about it. So I thought I'd start with this picture. We've been talking about Westminster, but a lot of people forget this building that's popped up. This one here, most of you should know it, Portcullis House. And if you see it on a dark, depressing, rainy afternoon, it looks like, I don't know, an abattoir. It's a very depressing building, and if you go in there and you go through the airport security, and then the police officer with his Uzi submachine gun eyes you up and down, and I believe they're going to get the special body scanners so that you appear naked as you walk in there, so they're obviously perverts as well. But we've all paid for this. But I've been in there, and it's an interesting experience. I met George Galloway. We went to tell him about Common Purpose, and he was quite polite, and he listened, but he did nothing, which is fairly typical. So we think this building is quite special. John Harris reckons that this is the building where actually all of the meat of the European Union is created. Now, I don't know whether it's true, but I think it's an interesting idea, because I don't believe anymore that the problem of the European Union is over there in Brussels. I think it's in this country. And I think a lot of the directives are starting off being built in this country. And I believe the seat of the problems in this country. And our guest speaker from America, Anthony Hilder, I think also believes the seat of the problems in this country. So it's unfortunate, because we like to think we live in a green and pleasant land, but we're learning a few things about ourselves, and we've got a bit of cleaning up to do. But once we do it, the house is going to be better. There's an angel in the sky there. But this is true. For the 2012 Olympics, some of the conspiracy theorists believe that they're going to put some holographic images in the sky for us to believe that there's been the second coming, and I bet that Mr. Miliband's one of them. Is it going to work? Right, I think I'll just go back a minute. Yeah. Okay, so we're here today in a court, effectively, because we thought the government needed to be put on trial. So I had to think through, and as an ordinary lay person, it seemed to me these are the key parts of a case. We've got to have a crime, we've got to have suspects, there's got to be a motive, they're going to use some form of weapon or vehicle, and then there's going to be witnesses and evidence. And that's my little summary of what's going on. So we're talking about a crime of treason. What does that mean? Well, Albert can tell you in detail, but all you need to know is you've been betrayed. You've been betrayed in a way that leaves you vulnerable, and it leaves your families vulnerable, and your children vulnerable, and your grandchildren vulnerable. So this isn't some little crime. This isn't something that's going to be swept under the carpet. This is a very big crime. It's a very serious crime. And we know who the suspects are, because they're becoming arrogant. They're parading around in front of us. They fiddle their expenses, they have second homes, and then they laugh about it. I actually think they've been duped, but we'll come back to that. But their motive, what is it? Money. It's always money initially, and after money, when you've got so much money you can't really use anymore, you have to go to the next level, which is a hunger for power. And that's where Mr. Blair is at the moment. He wants power. Mrs. Blair wants the houses and the money. He wants the power. And what are they doing? Well, what they're doing with their hands, they're not saying with their mouth. They're lying to us. They're deceiving us. It's subversive. It's all in the shadows. And they're attacking us in a number of areas: economic, political, socially. And that's why life isn't fun anymore. It's getting hard work, because they're making an impact. Witnesses. Well, there's millions of us, because we're living it. We're seeing the results day by day. And my father's just turned 90, and he's doing pretty well for a 90-year-old. But he said to me about 18 months ago, "Brian, do you think people have changed?" And I thought about it for a while, and I said, no, I think they have been changed. I don't think we've changed as people accidentally. I don't think youngsters get drunk through an accident. It's the fact that our whole society's been destabilised. So I said to him, I think that people have deliberately been changed. And I certainly think it now, having discovered common purpose. Is the evidence there? Well, the basic problem's there's too much. I couldn't bring all the boxes of papers with me, and if I brought them, I couldn't show them to you. I just can't get through them all. So we had a big problem saying, what are we going to cover in the conference? And we decided, rather than plugging through thousands of sheets of paper, we would try and give you a broad spectrum. And that's what I'm going to stick with. There's too much evidence. I thought I'd be a bit of a smart-ass. Witnesses, there are witnesses who see the things, they're witnesses of fact, and then in courts you can also bring in people who are experts. So you can have a person who's an expert in fraud or the chemical industry. So I thought I'd be cheeky and say, I think I've got a bit of both, because I'm living what's happening, so I am a witness of fact, but perhaps due to my military training, I've also got some expert skills which allow me, I think it's run out of battery, no? Which allow me to actually analyse some of the things for you. Okay, if you want evidence, we can get some of it in the UK column. If you go onto the website CP Exposed, there's hundreds of documents, and there's soon going to be another update, but you can go on what do they know. You've only got to put in common purpose on the internet now, and you'll find tons of information. So the evidence is pretty easy to find. Now I want to just get this business of people. I often say to the audiences, you're all nice, and I look around at the faces and make sure you're all nice. There's one or two of you probably not. But around us in history, there's been some pretty nasty people. And there have been nations and groups of individuals that want to invade this country, whether it's the French, lovely people, of course, or the Spanish, or the Germans, or then we've got political categories like communists and fascists. And those last two are words that people hide in. Because if you note at the moment, all of the media are running around screaming fascist, BNP fascists. We have anti-fascist, anti-Nazi league. But it's very interesting that if you go to Nazi or fascism and you go to communism, the root's the same. It's Marx. I don't want to get into the heavy side. It's a fact. It's easy. One takes you left in the circle, one takes you right, you end up at the same place. So when you start to see these names being bandied around, just think of a guy called Karl Marx who helped start it all. Who funded him? So here's subversion. You're not going to attack somebody openly. You are going to do it in the shadows, in the dark. You want to slip the knife in and the people don't even realise they've been knifed. You want to get the vaccine in and they don't even realise they've had the jab, but they've got the flu. So you're going to do everything that you can in a hidden, deceitful way. A lot of you will have seen this before, but just for those of you who haven't, there are people who out there over centuries have actually planned and thought about how you can destroy a society by attacking it in a psychological, sociological way, psychopolitics. And the Russians or the Soviets were very good at looking at this, and the bit down here in red, to produce chaos in the culture of an enemy. Well, this country's in chaos, isn't it? You know it. I know you know it, so I'm not going to dwell on it. But it's a fact. If you talk to people in the pub, they're always complaining about something doesn't work. The local school, where the teachers have now got to have a new camera. When they go out on trips with the children, they've got to have a special, sorry, not a camera, a special mobile phone that doesn't have a camera. So what the local educational authority is saying to the teachers at the school, we think you're paedophiles. But the teachers are going to get that phone because they've been told to do it. And it's interesting what John said about saying no. So here we've got the sign of people who are prepared to attack us by doing nasty, devious things with our minds. We've got to know about the Frankfurt School, because this is one of the early schools in the 1920s where psychiatrists and psychologists came together to learn the techniques. What can we do to mess up people's minds? What did you do at work, darling? Well, I spent the morning before coffee working out how to make somebody temporarily insane. Nice, but these people exist. It migrated, and we've already heard talk about the Fabians. And the Fabian Society from the late 1800s is designed to implement socialism by a slow, creeping, subversive effect. And that's why you've got many MPs, particularly in the Labour Party, who are full-time Fabian members, but they never tell you. And of course, good old Tony the Blair was chairman of the Fabian Society. And in this stained glass window, here's the men hammering the world into the shape of their choice. They're not going to ask you because you're just cattle. But they, the elitist Fabians, are going to decide how the world is re-engineered. And you and I are being re-engineered by them at the moment. If we go and look at the Communist Manifesto, that's what it said was going to happen. Property taken away. Get rid of the family. Why do you get rid of the family unit? Because then the children are lost. They're vulnerable. They're going to abolish countries. Isn't that happening? That's what the EU is doing. And do you know that Africa is shortly to join the European Union? And within Africa, they are already starting to regionalise it. And we have a document which showed an exhibition within the European Commission where Africa was being divided up into regions and the boundaries of the countries destroyed. And we're seeing a massive attack on religion. And don't be fooled by the cuddly one world religion bit, because that's part of the other side. So when you see lots of happy, clappy people in the churches and they're all talking about cuddling all of the other denominations, be very careful, because that is the road towards the one world church, but it's not a church of Christ. A little more evidence of what's going on, that the Communist International, the international movement of communists, discussed regionalising everything, getting rid of nations, controlling their economies, and heading towards what they said, that's their words, not mine, the New World Order. And you've now heard Mr. Blair and Obama openly talking, and Bush, of course, talking about the New World Order, one world government. They are so arrogant, they believe the quality of their personalities is so perfect, they are capable of ruling the world. That's frightening. That's scary. Now, this is an interesting little paper on the subject of mental health, and I've got a copy of it here, and it was written by a guy called Colonel Rees, Rawlings Rees. And he was an army officer. It's always the Pongos that cause the trouble, trust the sailors. And he was interested in psychiatry, and in 1940 he produced this little paper about mental health and how, when the war was won, our people, these are the words he uses, our people will change the way people think. We will educate them into being normal. And in this paper on page 2, he actually says, I've highlighted it, he actually says the most difficult area for our people to penetrate will be the law and medicine. Now, this man later went on to be intimately connected with the Tavistock Institute, which is here in London. And if you do your research on the Tavistock Institute, they've specialised over many years in learning how to mess around with people's minds. They're very dangerous. This man was British. The evidence is written evidence. I don't need to do much to show what was going on in his mind, and he wasn't doing it for fun. What about this man, Mr. Mosley? His family, still very big in something. And here he was. Was he a fascist? I think so. Was he a Nazi? We could argue about that. But he was very big in Plymouth, where I come from. And there's one of his parades. But this is interesting because this is a comment on Mr. Mosley the fascist by Michael Foot, a Labour MP, highly respected by some, and a socialist. And he describes Mosley as a wonderful rising star. But isn't that a bit strange that you've got a left-wing socialist describing a right-wing fascist as a wonderful person? I'm just going to say to you, it's because they're all liars. They want you to believe there's left and right, and while your brain is hopping between the two, they drive through the policy in the middle. Now, this document should be blasted over all of the national papers, but it's never been seen in the national papers. It's real. Now, this was mentioned by Christopher Story this morning. It was written in 1942 by the Nazis, printed in Berlin, Europäische Wirtschaftsgemeinschaft, or something equivalent to that, and it basically is the blueprint for the European Economic Community. And if you bother to read that document, and I think there is an English translation on the internet, they were talking about one Europe, one transport system, one currency. And in it, I believe I'm correct in saying, dear old England was to be de-industrialised. We were to be for a certain amount of agriculture, not grain, because that was all going to be in Eastern Europe, and tourism, because they were a bit upset with us. So the plan was to strip out anything which put the great into Great Britain. That's a real document. They weren't playing. And if you go through the Nazi document and you look at what is happening to this country and has happened, everything's happened. But no newspaper will print it. It's very curious. Now, this is an interesting group of people, the Bilderbergers. How many of you heard about those? It's not associated with McDonald's. It should be. So the Bilderbergers, created just after the war, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, well, he was a great guy because he was a confirmed Nazi. He's the first chairman, and these people start to meet in secret. Nobody quite knows what they discuss, but it's obvious that they start to pull in more and more powerful people. But we don't know what they talk about because they use the Chatham House rule. Beaky, if he's a problem, just open the door and... That's the MI5, what do they call it? Stooge. So, the Bilderbergers, we know their roots are very close to fascism, and at the end of the war, the material emerging is showing us that the Nazis weren't quite flattened. A lot of them simply moved location, and they took a lot of the wealth with them. And we know that in Spain, South America, through Europe and also the United States, various parts of the empire continued to tick along, except it became a corporate vehicle. We're not nice people sometimes, the British, because we have problems with traitors. And this is fact, isn't it? This is the Philby, Blunt, Maclean, and a couple of others who betrayed a lot of secrets to the Soviets in the 1960s. A couple of them went to live over there. One of them got knighted, I think, for services in treason to the British people. Real, don't have to prove it. And then we get this lot. Well, we're all laughing, but these are the people at the moment controlling our lives. And they are absolute liars in everything they do. And why have I grouped these people together? Because all of these people have got Marxism, Trotskyism, Leninism, communism in their backgrounds. Have they? I don't think so. I think they are. I think these people are still communists because they are following a plan to establish a communist empire. But I was just talking fascist, but it's not a problem because they're both based on Marx. He used to spend holidays with some very dodgy people when he was sober. This man, criminal charges, I think. This man, he's in charge of our defence. So when I joined the Navy or other people joined the Army, I was vetted. Friends and close relations were asked questions. Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Have you ever been a member of an extreme right-wing party? Have you ever committed adultery? Have you ever stolen anything? They go through your background, and if you've done anything too naughty, and certainly if I've been a member of the Communist Party, I couldn't have joined the Navy. So how come this man is in charge of the armed forces? And is it any wonder that at the moment we're seeing the armed forces pulled apart? All of the supply and spares capability being dismantled, the territorial army units pulled apart, the regiments pulled apart. And where are the troops? They're not here. It's not the point they're in Afghanistan, and I'm not being unkind because they are over there fighting. They're over there fighting, so they're not in this country. So you will be aware we've already got armed police on our streets who have come through from France, Poland, and I think Germany. Here's Tony, not a nice man. And here's the Tories. And these are the guys clustered around Cameron at the moment to ensure that he pushes us into the European project. And what's he said? Well, if the other countries have signed up to the Lisbon Treaty, I don't have to give you a referendum. As John says, that's not democracy. So we know that if this man's elected, the same policy is going to continue. Sorry, that was 5 minutes, was it? Okay. I'm going to go really quickly because I just want to jump through a few things. Here's Ted Heath, key traitor, arch traitor, Mr. Hurd. Mr. Rifkin suddenly started to pop up on the news. Have you heard him? Isn't it interesting? Out of the box. This is Christopher Story's book. If you read it, it tells you how the Russians and the Germans have been working together since the end of the Second World War. Does it mean all Germans and Russians are bad? No. It's the people who control. This you've seen before, a document setting out how religion, family, security to be broken up. And this, which came out of Christopher Story's book, a lot more detail about how it would be done, culture, substitution of false cheap heroes. So this is a manuscript saying how the country is going to be attacked. Meaningless art. That's Basingstoke. Culture, cheap drink from Tessa Cohen. They're having a bad day at Tesco's. Churches being demolished. Your children are being taken away. You're not even allowed to go into the playground with them now because there's going to be a park warden. Did you see that in the paper? We've already got a police state because we've got an elite who are governing us. People are imprisoned without trial. They're now being put in psychiatric institutes. We've got the vexatious threat assessment team of the police. And I was shown a little article at the back that 2 days ago there's a new police team of 100 people with a budget of £9 million, which is going to track people like me, considered to be a potential threat to the government. And they're going to be photographing me, which is, well, it's up to them. So here's Westminster in a mess. Other people have seen it. This is a document written in 1979 by a lady called Kitty Little. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us. But she pointed out that the country was being taken apart by subversion. It's an excellent booklet. She describes the lot. She didn't see common purpose, though. This one is the cuckoo. Every quango, every government department has now been politicised to help push the agenda through. So if you want to stop the tidal wave, start stopping the quangos. How do you stop them? They all waste your money. Complain. And look at the charities and look at common purpose. Now, you've seen her, but I want to show you something. This is Common Purpose, the international leadership charity helping people change the world. And that is the little thing by their door of their headquarters in London. How many of you have seen Harry Potter? Or some of it? And he goes from a station at one point off to Hogwarts, which is platform 10.5 or 7.5, is it? What is it? Okay, we've got a few things. Well, this is the equivalent, because you see this little door, this is the Common Purpose door. But it's really weird, because in the lobby, there's nothing that says it's common purpose. There's just a fire door in a wall. Some days MI5 goes through it, some days it's a Hobbit. It's odd, isn't it, that such a prominent charity should have such a non-prestigious front door. You've seen this. We've talked about engineering. Stick with that word, engineering society. I just want to come through. Here they are across the country. This is Julia Middleton. Her language, to me, is extreme right-wing. Useful idiot, steamrolling over people. Getting a fifth column to do the dirty work. This book gives you an insight into her mind. We know they use neuro-linguistic programming, which is to interfere with your subliminal mind to get you into their way of thinking. Where did that sort of technique come from? It came through the Frankfurt School and the Tavistock Institute. And people like Colonel Rawlings Rees were heavily involved in it. And the bad news is they're our people. We can't blame it on somebody else. They're just up the road. Police, well, they're waking up. We're now getting calls and information from people in the police. One police officer somewhere up north said to a colleague of mine, "We know about Common Purpose. They've already penetrated us." And that was quite interesting because the police are looking at it like we see it. Now this is an interesting one. Here's an immigration plot. Did you see it in the paper? A man blew the whistle that from 2000 Labour was going to allow a lot of people into the country. I'm not interested in what colour they were, it's just the mass coming in, because that puts pressure on us. But the word was socially engineer, radically change the country. Now, our border is controlled by a border agency, and recently they lost track of 40,000 people, as you do. And here's the lady in charge, Lynn Homer. Well, previously she was the chief executive from Birmingham City Council, and she had a few problems there, including election problems where they found boxes of uncounted votes. And eventually the job wasn't going very well, so she left. And she's also Common Purpose Advisory Board. So when you've been pushed out of a top job as a common purpose person, you've not made a good job, what happens to you? Well, let's look at her. She sat down next to somebody on the train, or somebody sat down and said their bag had been stolen. They thought it was asylum seekers. She set about telling the lady the incorrectnesses of such strong and inappropriate set of views. There wasn't human compassion, there wasn't concern, there wasn't comforting. She set to tell her that her views were wrong. So this is all out of the paper, I haven't made it up. Now, this is Gus O'Donnell, the Cabinet Secretary, head of the Home Civil Service, and he's delivering a speech, Check Against Delivery, Working to a Common Purpose. That's the title of his speech. It's on the internet. And in it, he praises Lynn Homer, who has become the head of the immigration unit. How can he do that? She's just been thrown out of a job. Common purpose? I'll leave you to think about it. Robert Peston, common purpose. He's the big man who advises us on what's supposed to be happening with the economy, but he never tells us the truth about the collapse of the pound and the dollar. Oh dear, this is the head of planning of the Conservative Party. But common purpose is socialist, and it's mainly worked through the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister and Labour. But now we've got the Conservatives at high level involved with it. Why? Because they're exactly the same. They just lie to you. Sorry? And this one, well, I couldn't believe this, because I've talked about this man before. You'll have seen him blasted all over your television sets because he's just had life imprisonment for a horrific paedophile incident up in Scotland. I thought he'd already gone to prison the last time I gave a talk, but he's only just gone. So I was pretty surprised when last night somebody said, do you realise his profile is still up on Common Purpose's website? Now the interesting thing is when Common Purpose selected this man for Common Purpose training, he was selected as a suitable person by the local advisory board, which contained a reasonably senior police officer. I have learnt to my consternation that that police officer just happens to come from the same police force that arrested this man for paedophilia. Isn't that a conflict of interest? What is this charity doing? Something very nasty. Two more to go. Law Society, I've talked about, riddled with common purpose, works directly with a company called the Association of Police Officers. Some emails, these are all on my website, so I'm not going to dwell on this. Here's Common Purpose trying to track us. They are really desperate to know who's taking the lid off. Here's Westminster trying to track people attacking the European Union. And at the bottom, asking questions about common purpose. I cannot find out who commissioned this research. So Westminster didn't want to tell me. Here's the Media Standards Trust, not mentioned on Common Purpose's door. But this is interesting. This is an organisation called the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. It's a mixture of all the Eastern Bloc countries, including Russia, and they're talking about how they're going to sort Europe out. And it's being recommended by Mr. Rifkin, who has suddenly appeared to help promote the European Union. And, oh dear, the document's called Common Purpose. It's easy, isn't it, when you know what to look for, what the common purpose is. Now, we talked about the Bilderbergers. Here's Mr. Ed Balls, and here he is admitting that he went to a Bilderberger conference and the costs were provided by you. Well done. But this is a Bilderberger press release, and if you read it somewhere, I can't find it quickly, but it says that people attend in a private capacity and not an official capacity. So somebody's telling porkies here because he claimed public expenses, but Bilderberger said he attended in a private capacity. This is a Telegraph article on the Bilderbergers, who never tell us what they're doing. And in this document, the Bilderbergers are quoted quite rightly as saying they're a shadow world government. But Tories, Lib Dems, Labour attend Bilderberg. So what are they doing? Well, there's George Osborne. He's been attending Bilderberger. So we've got Labour and Conservatives both attending a meeting in a very secretive organisation that started its roots around the Nazi era. Do you get a warm feeling? And if you still don't believe it, this is, I know it's very faint, but this is a Westminster document, and it's the all-parliamentary group for one world governance. So down here, they can't run the country, but they're already planning to rule the world. These people are dangerous. So if we sum it up, we know what the communists were plotting. I'll use the word Marxist, because then I can get rid of communists and fascists. And I put it to this court that treason has been committed and is being committed by the Lib Lab Con. And they are dismantling this country to force us into a foreign power, which is the European Union, and that European Union is a dictatorship. Thank you very much.